What's up, guys? Welcome back to Bible Home to Dunce. Today we're in Nehemiah chapter number 7. Let's get started.
All right. Nehemiah chapter 7, this is kind of getting towards the end of the project. So Nehemiah's already finished the wall, but in this chapter, he's hanging the gates in the walls, and he's fortifying the whole city. So now you have to look at, and what's interesting is the project is basically done, but the book is not over. Which means the book of Nehemiah is not about stacking bricks around a city. The book is much bigger than that, and the theme is broader than that. And so he's hanging the doors on, and they're making dedication basically for the city. And what's happening here is that Nehemiah is looking around, and he's looking to the future, and he's saying, okay, so now that we have walls, what is life going to be like inside the walls? Because it's one thing to finish up a project, but it's another thing to finish like the hearts behind the project. And so in verse number 2, it says, "And I gave charge of Jerusalem to my brother Hanani and to Hananiah, the leader of the citadel, for he was a faithful man and feared God more than many." I want to tell you something about leadership you're learning in this book. Leadership has influence. And so Nehemiah is identifying people who are following him, and he is passing down leadership to them. The way parents ought to be passing down to kids, and disciple makers should be passing down to disciples. All of this stuff is working together. And what he's really doing is following, before it's ever said, following the same pattern that Paul gave to Timothy. For instance, Jackson's going to read you a book from 2 Timothy 2:2. This is what Paul wrote to Timothy. Go.
It says, "What you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, commit to faithful men who will be able to teach others also."
Okay, so he's saying what you've heard from me, pass on. Now I want to tell you something else about leadership. In leadership, you can't ever take people beyond where you've gone yourself. And in spiritual leadership, you can't pour out into somebody something that's not already inside of you. So there's a lot here, really, what it's coming down to is disciple making. And what he said here, he said he was a faithful man and he feared God more than many. To fear God in this context, it doesn't mean to be terrified of God. It means to rightfully be in awe of God, to be in wow with God. And it means to take him serious. And so he's passing on leadership to people who had the same view of God that he had. Why? Not the same people who had the same politics as him or the same interests as him. If his leadership was being passed down to people who saw God the way he saw it. Why? Because God has got to be at the center of this story. Now, as you read down through this passage, you saw in verse 5, it says, "Then my God put it into my heart to gather the rulers, the nobles, and the people, that they might be registered by genealogy." And what I like about this is Nehemiah is saying that he is sensitive to the leadership of God in his own heart. And I'm going to tell you where this comes from. When you have a solid prayer life, a willingness to obey, and a surrender to God, this is when God is moving in our hearts. So God is not going to move any more than he's already moved. Like, for instance, if God has given you an assignment and you rejected that assignment, why would he give you something else before you do what you're supposed to do? Nehemiah in this passage is sensitive to what God's leading in his heart because his prayer life was right, his life was dedicated, and he's showing us what it is to kind of pass off things to the next generation. The most difficult part about reading this chapter is all of the names. I mean, good grief. It's listing a ton of names. As a matter of fact, it's saying that inside the land, there are 49,942 people mentioned in this whole section. But I want to encourage you to do something. When you find books of the Bible and chapters of the Bible like this, and you kind of dread it, you're like, oh, I don't like it when we study this kind of stuff in the Bible. It helps to remember that these aren't just names. These are promises made and promises kept. Now, here's how you can know that. Jackson's going to read us Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 3. Jeremiah is talking about this before Nehemiah ever comes around. Listen what Jeremiah says.
"For look, the days are coming. This is the Lord's declaration. When I will restore the fortunes of my people, Israel and Judah, says the Lord. I will restore them to the land I gave to their ancestors, and they will possess it.
That's right. So God's promising in the book of Jeremiah, he's going to restore Israel. And here he literally is. So with God, one of my favorite characteristics of God is any promise made is also a promise that he keeps. I also love the fact that God, he loves his people, but he loves his persons too. Think about it like this. He remembers every name, he keeps every promise, and he keeps them in his heart. Now, when you look at this list, I mean, we're talking about an entire country, 49,000 people in the whole country at this point. That's not a ton of folks. The group may sound small here, but listen, God is not playing a short game. God is playing a long game. He's going to use this small group of people to multiply and to retake the land, all for the purpose of bringing one Messiah named
Jesus
into the land. So whereas God may be starting with a small group, he's playing the long game for you. When you read through this story, I think probably what we need to do, we need to recognize that what God puts together, he provides for. Where God funds with people and hands and hearts and resources, God has done all of this. And you and I can both today trust the Lord to take care of all of our needs in him. This is a testimony that says we can always trust God. Promises made are promises kept. Let's keep reading. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day.